Okay, if you could just wrap up your conversation 1 more minute, and then I'll ask our keynote speaker, Dr. Christopher Thompson, to come back up to the podium. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, what I'd like to do now is, in a similar manner, if you could have a representative from your table, if you have something to a question or a comment or a summary, brief summary, please take the podium. You'll see the microphone over to my right on the floor mic, and ask a question or make a concise comment on your discussion at the table. And Dr. Thompson, I'll ask if you could come up, please, now and receive the questions and comments.
I feel like Dr. Naughton was so much better at expressing his inability to give a decent answer. I'm just going to have to say I don't know.
Stephen Reed representing Table 10. The question that we tried to answer was that disconnect, and first of all, where's the disconnect? How do people feel that disconnect, and how do you join both the farmers and those folks who are looking for it? And the discussion was that there is a community that feels disconnected from farming, from the land. Part of that's recent, that in society today, when I was growing up, we maybe were 1 or 2 generations removed from the farm. For most people in the Midwest, now that even that connection's been frayed, and so there is a yearning, something missing from that, where that's coming from, and that's probably fueled the proliferation of the urban gardens, of the farmers markets, right, the backyard chickens, the beekeeping, as people try to find that connection, fill that need, that yearning that they have inside. But how do we as producers or agricultural leaders, cross that disconnect? And I think part of the point that we had was that it's actually turned farmers into, we're also now educators, as we have to try to educate the consumer, and the challenge that gives us on top of all the other things that we're trying to do in our daily lives, makes that challenge much more difficult. And that was the basis of our discussion. We didn't really come up with a question.
Thank you for the comment. Thanks for sharing and paying attention. I appreciate it. It's getting late in the day. I know that can be hard. The way the bridges can be built, I've been in academia for 22 years, so you have to forgive me if my answers sound like an academic. But at the university levels, I really think we have got to get farmers, farm organizations, ag companies, and universities at a table and talk about how we're going to get a conversation going here. Historically, as I tried to emphasize just quickly in passing, Catholic Church had a very robust engagement in the agricultural questions through the 30s and the 50s. For reasons I'm not going to get into, it started to just drop out of our conversation in the university curriculum, that is, philosophy of nature. As a result, we had generations of people that just got further and further removed from our contact with nature and its design and its significance. That was not malice, that just happened. So it's not surprising that we've now got this enormous and frankly a wonderful industry of agriculture. It's not a demon, it's an incredible accomplishment. But how does the single largest industry after military not have any traction in Catholic higher ed? That to me is a challenge that really needs to be looked at. So one way you do it is at the institutional levels of higher ed. Pontifical Institute on Ag and Environment is one way I would love to see that take off. But places like the University of St. Thomas could partner with U of M and have conversations of this sort in a more sustained way. There are obviously significant resources there. Someone told me a couple years ago, single largest transfer of wealth is going to be happening in the central United States in the next few years as more and more farmers end up having to hand their land and resources off to the next generation. So we've got a lot of farmers out there that I suspect are trying to think about, well, how do I make a difference here in a way that's going to make some impact? And I think that would be one way to do that. On the flip side, Newman Centers. It seems to me we ought to try to work more closely with Newman Centers at larger state and land grant universities and try to create a climate of conversation there. If you want to become an engineer, an artist, or a theologian, we've got a university for you. But if you want to grow hogs or corn or soybeans, raise hogs for a living and as a vocation, we don't have a place for you at the Catholic University. I think that has to stop. We've got lots of students who go and get farm business management degree, I think it's called, a 2-year associate thing. Why couldn't we partner with those organizations and say, why not a degree in liberal arts, Catholic liberal arts tradition, or Christian liberal arts tradition, and farm business management? I really don't think this is rocket science. It's just a little bit of a blind spot that we can push back. So that to me is, as an academic, in engaging that next generation, I think you would turn it around relatively quickly. I've had the privilege of working with young people, and even though you think, oh my gosh, the problems of the world, the young people come in, they're bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, happy as can be, eager to take it on. I'm the one that the oldest, tiredest guy in the classroom. So we can work with the next generation. That's how I would do it. Thanks. Ron.
My name is Ron Roseman, and I'm a farmer from Iowa and a board member of Catholic Rural Life. And we covered a lot of ground, and building on what Dr. Thompson's already talked about, we said that there's a little bit of farmer in all of us, and that we need more farmers, not fewer, and that we are very encouraged by our youth, who many want to become farmers. And I gave the example of Iowa. I helped start an organization in 1986 called the Practical Farmers of Iowa. We are now up to 3,500 members in our state, the majority of whom are young wannabe farmers and beginning farmers. So we are offering resources to them so they can fulfill their dreams. We talked about rural communities, are aging and losing youth to the urban areas. And we talked about that yes, we will always have big farms, but a way to bridge that gap is to recognize that there is a great need for food hubs and local foods. And so like in our community, which is 50 miles from Omaha, we are struggling to keep our parish going and our community going, but we could have hundreds, if not thousands, of small farms feeding not only the people in our area, but the larger urban areas. We talked about that we've lost a generation of people who have been a little bit brainwashed by science and technology. And quote, sound science is the study that you agree with. That's considered sound science, and the one that you promote. We talked about the risk of deforming nature if you are going to be a steward, and that means to our group that says we should not patent life forms. Mother Nature will have the last word. she always will. And that's, our group is referring to weed resistance, for instance, that these so-called patented products really will have a very short life in terms of nature. And we also wanted to have a copy of your talk available. So that covers it all. But yeah.
I think there will be copies of the talk in one form or another. So you're welcome. Yep. I don't have I don't know what that hashtag Twitter is. So you can do that. I know what it is, but I don't have a Twitter account, but it'll be on the website. Yeah. All right. I did want to say this much, Ron. Thanks for the observation. That one of the things I tried to just nudge a little bit we have to start reflecting on our Christian communities and as a purchasing power. We've spent a lot of time talking about the ethics of production. You got to produce animals this way. You got to produce them this way. You got to produce your field, and that's all very good. But they're producing because I'm buying, and I cannot have it both ways. I can't ask a farmer to say, "Hey, stop behaving the way in the field, but I want my food at the cheapest possible price, and I want it now." We are going to have to reflect as a church on how our consuming habits of consumption need to support the kind of communities that we want to see. I would want to encourage, again on the bridge building, I would want to encourage the business schools out there to work on a virtual model that can bring Christian, faith-filled, committed growers and consumers together through the web. I go down, I won't mention the stores, but I pay top dollar for local grown organic food. The place is packed. There are lots of people who are willing to pay top dollar for local grown organic food. If I thought I could find the committed farmers who were socially aware and Catholic and Christian on the web, I'd go buy from them. I don't know where they are. It seems to me, couldn't we create a virtual space where the growers and the consumers could connect? We'd make an agreement that a certain percentage of the sales would go to the local parish. So when I'm buying my stuff, I know the income is going out to the far corners. Those local communities really need our resources, and they have a hard time getting access to us, and I have a hard time getting access to them. That doesn't seem to me to be an insurmountable, at least it's an interesting problem, that a business school or a business programs should be able to partner with and try to explore. Lots of resources in these Catholic communities to break it open.
Dr. Thompson, one about overcoming that disconnect, again, as the first speaker mentioned, and specifically building on the idea of what St. Thomas Aquinas says about encountering God in persons and in things, and especially in light of what Pope Francis calls the culture of encounter, the theology of encounter. In what ways can or should the vocation of an agricultural leader or an environmental leader be about fostering this encounter between the person and the land, fostering that healthy human ecology? One way we talked about doing that was through something like agritourism, for example, which faces a lot of regulatory hurdles, but is something that, in fact, is doing it. You see that with Joel Salatin and Polyface Farm and other things. But can you make some other practical suggestions for helping agricultural leaders foster in themselves this theology of encounter so that we can encounter the land and look at it anew?
Well, hopefully, one suggestion would be to hold a conference on faith, food, and the environment and raise up the vocation of the agricultural worker. And we really just have to lift them up because this is extremely important work. Not for just the obvious reason, because you feed the hungry of the world and you address the problems of poverty, but because you're keepers of the soil, you're keepers of the land. You have an incredible responsibility here. And you have a commitment to a place like no other. You don't get to walk away. You don't get to take a year off. You don't get to take a break. When you're a farmer and caring for this land, you're in it for the long haul. That's an unbelievable commitment to the common good. That's a kind of heroic and steadfast witness and service that we ought to call out and raise up. I get to putz with my garden in the backyard. This year I'll do tomatoes and then I'll try a little green peppers. Boy, those sunflowers never came up. And I've got a couple chickens and they're cute and they're fun. I'm telling you, I would starve to death if it lived on my garden. And you start to learn what an unbelievable commitment and service to the common good, in fact, farming done well is. You start to learn what an unbelievable service to the common good that kind of commitment is required of them. And in order to raise that vocation up, we can speak to that. We can encourage that and call that out and support that. That's what I would try to encourage.
Dr. Thompson, my name's excuse me, Kevin Edberg, and I'm representing Summit. The conversation that we had was that if agricultural leaders are going to engage in a different conversation, we need to be aware of and change our language. I've never heard an argument about transgenic mutations and GMOs quite so poetic as yours. Looking forward to seeing the copy. But for example, that we reclaim not a conversation about how we treat the environment, but how we treat creation, capital C.
Yeah.
And that our role as producers is not that our sole job is to put stuff out into the world, but that we are stewards, and that we reclaim the language of stewardship. And that in our role as the people who are being fed, that our job is not just to be consumers, as though our job is simply to munch down as much as we can consume, but that we are to take our daily sustenance. And perhaps there's some other language. Right. And if you had some other, perhaps you are an urban gardener and not an urban farmer.
That's right.
But perhaps there's some other language. And do you have some suggestions for other language that has occurred to you that would be entry points into changing the dialogue?
I would subscribe to Catholic Rural Life magazine, to be perfectly honest. I don't mean to be entirely facetious, but they are, lately in the last few years, have really been investing in the theology of creation and their approach to the vocation of the farmer, and really recalibrating the language. Nothing particularly wrong about environment and its discussion, but it's interesting. The church, as a church in its magisterium, is fairly late in the discussion of the environment. I hope that doesn't upset everybody, but if you actually look at our magisterial pronouncement on the environment, it really only goes back to maybe John Paul II, maybe Paul VI, Mater et Magistra. The church's discussion of environment qua environment is fairly late in the conversation. And part of that is the church doesn't really talk about the environment. What the church talks about is creation. Deeper than fossils. Creatures live in environment, and then only one creature, the human person, lives in a world. A location is the most primitive way you can. Rocks are always in a location. We talk about the location of oil and the location of shale. That's in a location. We talk about an environment. That's typically an animal lives in an environment. But the human person lives in a cosmos, in a world. I'm capable of drawing into this beautiful earth in a single act of contemplation and praise in a way we don't seem to think goes on at the other levels. So the church has an extensive theology of creation. We've got centuries of discussion of theology of creation. But we have not made that translation, as you've just been pointing out. We've not made that translation as effectively, maybe, in discussions of the environment. And in fact, you have to be a little careful about discussions of the environment because it can start to despiritualize and desacralize how we approach the world. You just have to be sort of aware of that and try to make those translations as best you can, as sensitively as you can. I'd turn to Catholic Rural Life magazine. I'm a subscriber. I love it. Hello, Dr. K.
Hi. So this is a report from Table 9, and we spent about GMOs, and Jim and Leanne at our table are certified organic farmers, and they discussed how their customers will inquire about their use of genetically modified organisms in their process as a negative thing. But at the same time, we talked about the benefits that can come out of GMOs, increasing yields, lowering costs, and also the new genetic engineering technology aimed at reducing environmental impacts associated with crop production. So I guess the question that comes out of that is what are sort of guiding principles that we can use to apply to this idea of genetic engineering, because I feel like sometimes it gets labeled as a bad, but yet it's more nuanced than that. And how do we work through that?
That's an extremely important question, which is my way of saying I don't know. No, no. I want to. I'm way above my pay grade here. I'll just want to discern this. What are going to be the principles that guide our use of genetic modified organisms? In my own opinion, whatever that's worth. It's not intrinsically disordered. It's not something we have to avoid at great moral peril. The technology is capable of being used prudently. Now, that is not a green light to say, well, therefore, go ahead. I tried very, very quickly to say, in deference to the order of creation of which you find yourself, so you got to be careful about just wild experimentation. When all other reasonable alternatives have been considered, if I had a criticism, the GMO technology tends to come with an entire culture. It comes with an entire economy. It comes with an industry. There's nothing wrong. I don't mean to say, therefore, it's bad. But it's really embedded in a whole approach. We have to be more circumspect about exporting this particular product and technology into an environment where that's just not it's not safe.
And one thing that Jim said, that he was paraphrasing, conducting that sort of research with a sense of humility. We didn't get further than that, but that seemed like whatever that actually means in practice. But that was
right. And this is where, like my daughter Ann is often fond of saying, "Thank God for God." One of the ways you grow in humility is just prayer and temperance and justice and humility. We have a fantastic tradition. Now, I'm not going to say it's easy, but that is our way forward. That is it. We're going to have to solve this problem on our knees, looking very closely at the ground and thanking God for a beautiful earth that He's given us. We just have to enter into the resources of our spiritual traditions, these great aquifers of living life that are waiting to be drawn. I'm fully confident if we do this, we're going to be okay. Doesn't mean we'll solve it all. Doesn't mean there isn't going to be some suffering, but we can do it. And we have the spiritual traditions of abstinence and fasting, of disciplining ourselves in matters of the table, of entering into a more thoughtful relationship on our habits of consumption. I really think that will only serve to enlighten our minds on these complicated questions.
Thank you, Dr. Anthony Granado. I'm with Table 8. We had a discussion about kind of your talk and maybe reflecting on areas where our technology has moved us away from a natural understanding of our relationship to the natural order. But we're also recognize that the church is not against science. The church very much promotes science, and I think the last question talked about yield. But at the end of the day, how do we balance, trying to live rightly with creation? But we have the question, a legitimate one, of feeding what will be 9 billion people. How do you do that? It doesn't seem like everyone can be an organic farmer and still feed 9 billion people. How do you balance that reality with trying to live in a just way with the Creator that honors the natural law and et cetera? So,
it's another one of those good ones. I think the sake of this conversation, this isn't going to be an either-or thing. There's no panacea here. That is, if we're all going to go out and be organic farmers, that's not a realistic solution. It's going to take a whole host of technologies, a whole host of people. I do think promoting sustainable ag practices as best we understand that, if that means organic, that's debatable, right? We have to learn to support that. We're going to need a chorus of witnesses. We're going to need a chorus of approaches to resolving the problems of food, of feeding the hungry. Many people have pointed out in a number of different contexts, speakers from the UN and from the Vatican just the other day, it's not a question of volume or yield. It's a question of distribution, for example. It's a question of food waste. It's a question of government agencies acting justly to get these resources. That's a whole network of questions that we have to take seriously. But I can't imagine I'm saying something that everybody doesn't know.
So So Vincenzo asked this wonderful question in Italian, and here's how it gets translated. And so I'm going to add some context that'll help. But the question is how to conjugate agriculture, environment, and development on a grand scale. And so what was happening in the conversation in that moment was one thing was about the encyclical that's coming out. And the comment was made by Vincenzo again that he's very hopeful that this encyclical won't just be on the environment, which seems to stop short of engaging the question of agriculture as a feature of that. And that he sees agriculture as a way of preserving the creation, and he's hoping that that will get included in the encyclical. And so in thinking about how to present this question in a way that you might be able to respond to it, I wondered if we couldn't think about agriculture and all your pointing out the lack, the lacuna of agricultural education available in a Catholic context. Wouldn't agriculture, as a way of preserving the creation, that whole sort of gestalt that goes with that, would that not be the church's starting place, in a sense, for entering into the conversation with the environmentalists, since it's the starting place is nature itself and the proper use of stewardship of the earth itself for the purpose of human development? Do you know what I'm trying to say? That somehow if the church would have a lot to say, as has just been mentioned, about the doctrine of creation and the use of the goods of the earth for the purpose of the common good and so on. Maybe the way to conjugate agriculture, environment, and development is to focus on agriculture and all those things that you said about farmers, the dignity of the farmer as submitting to the intelligence that's hidden within the order of things. That seems like the church's response to the question of the environment, that it would deepen the question that people right now are simply trying to settle through science and technology.
At least on that last point, Doctor's a colleague of mine, so you'll forgive us if we talk like theologians here in the end. But in my mind, one of the best definitions of the environmental position is what the church means by the natural law. How do I reasonably participate in this eternally, divinely arranged cosmos? How does typical definition of the natural law, the rational creature's participation in the eternal law? Well, really, that's just simply asking, how do I thoughtfully live in this divinely arranged cosmos? That's what the natural law tradition is. That's what the environmentalists are asking. We have a lot of possibilities for convergence there. And of course, there's lots and lots of reflection in the Christian community on the natural law.
Hello, I'm Elvira Ramirez, a Catholic Rural Life board member from Stockton, California. And I'm reporting from Table 2. You actually have already spoken a little bit to what I would have initiated, but we focused in the beginning on your comments about how original sin didn't impact or didn't affect lower creation. And the discussion, for me anyway, had started at there's still a problem of language sometimes that I think, especially as we think of engaging the younger generation, and maybe it is, this whole talk that you just referred to about the environment, looking at our relationship to the environment, not so much as lower and higher, it's the interdependence. It really is about stewardship, and that we want to bring, that's why this conversation is so helpful and good, because it helps us all to articulate, what we thought we understood and maybe isn't working anymore. And it is good to have the church help us to reframe our understanding about that, because we have so much to learn from that natural world that, instead of domination, which might have been another word that was applied with the environment in mind. So just that it really generated good conversation. We did go from that to a couple of ideas on how to bridge that gap. And one of them, we would like to suggest that from our conference here, the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace might add to the prayers of the faithful that always one of the prayers should be for food production, or in some way that this is brought as such an important part of who we are as Christians in terms of feeding the world. And, just as we pray for the Pope and our leaders, and maybe the third one is going to be about food. So, and then the other you've kind of already addressed, but about educational programs, finding a way that these discussions can happen for other generations especially, but other groups about food and agriculture.
Thanks, Sylvia. I have the privilege of serving with her on the board of Catholic Rural Life, so thank you. I want to make sure we just have enough time. Thanks for that, Elvira.
So Steve Peterson from Table 4. I think initially we acknowledged this big gap, and a point was made that even farmers, large conventional farmers, so wrapped with technology, may even feel disconnected from the land. Now I'm going to go off the reservation a little bit. This isn't my table. Steve Peterson, farmer and 27 years with General Mills. Cargill General Mills, kind of the big, powerful, abusive entity here. And I would say, back to my own faith, the most I see as Christ is radical inclusion. And so this topic is a topic of our time. And we are so quick in this world to demonize and polarize. We need all of us at the table. You mentioned this. And I think that really centers on what Jesus is asking us to be. Even Monsanto has to be at the table, folks.
Absolutely.
They have something to say. Now, I'm not endorsing them, but we have to have all of us here. And if this is a start to do that, that would be great.
Right.
And I would lastly say that I have the good fortune I help lead sustainability at General Mills. And I'll humbly submit to you, I do this full time, this work. And I see more actual action happening from business than I see from production agriculture or from the church at large.
Great.
So I can tell you what I mean by that, but there's reason for it. So I just, for people that sort of put people in boxes, I ask not put people in boxes and invite us all, because that's how we're going to really move this forward for our kids and grandkids.
I can't think of better closing remarks. Thank you. Thank you. God bless you. Thanks.
Thank you all for being patient, being engaged. I saw very few people sleeping at their tables. And again, I think this is what this is about, is a dialogue and a symposium to really probe some of these difficult questions and continue to create this dialogue. Now, how many of you out there are farmers or have a farm or have something? I think over half of the group here. And I know one thing about farmers is that they love to solve problems. You know, whenever I have a problem, I have a good friend who's a farmer. He comes out and helps me out. And I really want to affirm your patience. Tomorrow, we're going to have 3 sessions all about food production and food security and a couple of concerns around environmental ethics. Again, kind of continuing to move toward solutions. And then Friday, for those of you who stay, and I think 2/3 of you are staying till Fridays, we get to hear from you all and your reflections over this course of 2.5 days, what you've seen, what you think is needed, just like what Steve Peterson just shared. You know, we need to be in dialogue with all kinds of sizes of corporations and organizations, because behind every company are people, human beings who live there and make decisions and work there. And we need to continue to challenge ourselves how to do this well and also address some of the real concerns that we have. So I look forward to more dialogue tomorrow. Tonight, we have a reception right out the door here to your left as you walk out. Reception for about the next 45 minutes, and then we'll have a time to eat together and break bread just on the other side of this wall. And that will go from about 6 o'clock till 7. And then we will have a public lecture at 7:30 just down the quad from here. You can actually see the building if you look out these windows. It's diagonally across. Will be a public lecture that you all are invited to, and we have seats for you reserved already. For a message from the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace, and Father Michael Tierney will be presenting. So we did invite the public, and so we're expecting about 500 to 600 people attending, including yourselves. So just know you're invited. We've got a seat saved for you there. And now I'd say just enjoy our conversation and reception out the door here. Thank you very much.